Okay, I'd like to call the Committee on Infrastructure to order. It's February 28th, 2024. It's 7 p.m. and we're in the Aldermatic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll? We have the first item we'll have is the public hearing. So would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Thibodeau?
Here.
Alderman Sullivan? Alderman Patricia Klee, I'm here. Alderman Richard Dow?
Present.
And Alderman Michael O'Brien.
Okay, just for the record, Alderman O'Brien is ill this evening and can't be with us. Alderman Sullivan is tied up in travel between airports, so he's not with us this evening. Or he's driving?
Yeah, he's driving in this rainstorm, so
Right.
yeah.
So, before we get into the public hearing on the street discontinuance, Marlene, I'd like to call on Director Sullivan to give us an overview of where we're at with this petition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director for the City of Nashua. In the interest of providing some brief remarks before the public hearing on the petition for discontinuance of Marlene, I wanted to just quickly summarize the process through which a discontinuance petition is considered by city staff, as I believe that will shed some light on some information that I want to share with you this evening. When a petition is received by the city, it goes through an internal review process involving the fire department, community development and planning, the engineering department, and of course the legal department, who is in fact the recipient of the petition. Once that review happens, those departments collaborate internally. They provide a list of comments, concerns, questions, and we review those as a matter of course prior to the petition arriving before the Committee on Infrastructure for consideration and for the public hearing. Earlier today, the legal department, legal counsel, through Deputy Corporation Counsel Celia K. Leonard, issued an opinion that ultimately concluded that the discontinuance petition scheduled for consideration this evening may in fact not be necessary based on a pattern of law spelled out in the state of New Hampshire. And while I won't get into the intricacies of that, and frankly I'm not qualified to, essentially Attorney Leonard's position is that because of the date of the initial subdivision plan showing the road in question, or the road as it were in question this evening, in 1965, and a matter of law stating that plans recorded before 1969 that are not later accepted are effectively can be discharged. Her position is that essentially the rights dedicated in 1965 as part of the approved subdivision plan expired by an operation of law later in 1985, thereby resulting in the fact that the road does not in fact exist as of this date and time. And with the road not existing, there is no need for a discontinuance petition to be submitted and considered. Effectively, the road does not exist. There are other nuances, I believe, that we may hear about this evening relative to other easement rights and infrastructure that exists within the road right-of-way that was at least contemplated. And I certainly would recommend that the committee give the petitioner an opportunity to speak to those. But essentially, Attorney Leonard's position is that there's no action needed based on her understanding of the facts surrounding this road, as it were, Marlene. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have to the extent that I can. Obviously, I'm not serving as legal counsel because I can't. But again, Attorney Leonard did give me the authority to articulate this to the committee this evening. I do know as well, just briefly if I may, Mr. Chair, that there are some interested citizens that may wish to speak this evening, and I believe it's your interest in holding the public hearing. But I certainly think it would be valuable to hear from the petitioner who may have an alternative position on the need for a discontinuance or perhaps a more nuanced interpretation of it.
So we will be going through the regular public hearing format. I will ask for people speaking in favor, people speaking against, and then a second time for people in favor and second time for people opposed. So we'll be taking those comments, and action on this won't be taken until the next infrastructure meeting, which I'm not sure what the date is, but it will be posted.
I think it's yeah, March, I want to say March 27th? Yeah, March 27th.
March 27th.
Yep.
So, before we start, are there any questions for Director Sullivan from anyone? Nope. Okay. Alderwoman Clee?
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I maybe it should wait till, and if you feel it should wait till after this conversation and perhaps so on. There is a issue with the sewer and access to the utility and so on. Does that need to be discussed during this public hearing, or would that be something that would be discussed at the next board?
It's an excellent question.
infrastructure?
I do think, based on what I understand that the petitioner will cover during their remarks, I would suggest that you hear from the petitioner on that matter. I will just note that the presence of any contemplated sewer, sanitary sewer, drainage easements that were shown on plans, they're a related but perhaps independent issue to the petition, and I expect the petitioner will comment on that a bit, but perhaps, Alderwoman Clee, if you have a question subsequent, I can answer that for you.
If I may? Yes. I'm just basing my comments on the comments that happened during the planning board meeting with city engineer Hudson.
Yes, and what I'll briefly address is that at the time of the planning board's consideration of this matter, this legal advice was not available to the planning board at that point in time. And so I do want to qualify their recommendation on the matter by saying that I would argue they did not have the full picture of facts in front of them. Mm-hmm. What they did contemplate and what they discussed directly is that there may be ongoing needs for the preservation of some city rights within what was contemplated at the time as being a road right-of-way. And I believe Attorney Piedra will speak to this evening. There was certainly some need to maintain the ability to access drainage infrastructure. There was also a discussion of vehicle turnaround on one end to the western end of the road or the road. But again, based on council's advice, those items may not be relevant this evening.
Okay.
But I leave you to hear the petitioner's remarks on that matter, and I'm happy to weigh in after those.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we'll start with people speaking in favor of the potential street discontinuance. And as explained, it may not be necessary, but
That's not yours.
she's looking for your presentation.
No, I'm
Would
looking
you
at
name and address for the record, please?
Attorney Israel Piedra, attorney at Wells, White and Fontaine here in Nashua. I represent Juan Ocasio, owner of 15 Quinton Drive, who is the petitioner in this matter.
Do we need to put this in a show?
If you could zoom in,
Yeah.
Alderwoman
Just click
Clee,
on it.
the plus button at the top.
Okay, there it is, sorry. I was looking for it.
Great. So certainly if the committee has questions, feel free to let me know. But I'm going to start by just helping everyone visualize what's going on here. So this is from City GIS. My client, Mr. Ocasio's property is highlighted in red there, the bold red. You can see in the middle, there's 4 lots. It's bisected by Marlane, the Marlane area, if you can see that in the middle there. And there's 4 lots on either side. That's just to give a little bit of a satellite overview. If we could go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to show what Marlane looks like from the ground. You can see the area on the right-hand side that's where city vehicles turn around. You can see it's worn. That's my client's house on the left-hand side, and the Marlane area goes back from that apron back to the east there. The next slide shows just another view from my client's property. Again, the Marlane area is on the other side of that stand of trees. And then the next slide shows from the other side of Marlane. This is looking from the Curtis Drive side. And that house there is 14 Curtis Drive. The owner is Andrea Pierce, who I don't represent, but I understand submitted a letter in support of the discontinuance petition. And that just is to give some visual context. So I do think it's important to go through some of the history here because it's relevant to the legal opinion that was issued. and I think this will help provide some explanation for that. So if I could go to the next slide, please. You can see Marlene at the top. This is the original subdivision plan from 1964, approved in 1965. Marlene is circled in red, and you can see that it connects Quinton and Curtis Drives. Relevant here, you can see that abutting Marlene are 9 lots at that time. There's 5 lots in the interior that only abut Marlene, which was in fact the reason for having Marlene there, because those lots needed frontage. Again, this was submitted to the planning board in 1964 and approved in 1965. Fast forward to 1977, which is the next slide. The lots had not yet been built upon. The developer decided, for some reason, I'm not sure, to redevelop those 9 lots into 4 lots, larger lots. So you can see here, this is the 1977 revised plan, which shows Marlene circled. It's rotated. And the 4 larger lots are shown there. So what's relevant here is shown on the next slide, which zooms in on the note, the plan note. If you just scroll down a little bit, the relevant part is highlighted. It says, Marlene not to be constructed, but reserved for future sanitary and drain easement. So as Mr. Sullivan talked about, the question here is, when was this road dedicated, and at what time, in what law applied at that time? So prior to 1989, the law said that once a road is dedicated, it expires automatically after 20 years. And so if a road is not accepted within those 20 years, the public right is automatically gone. As the committee I'm sure knows, the way roads become public roads most often is through a dedication and acceptance process. The developer dedicates the land, the city accepts it. It doesn't become a public road unless there's that acceptance. Critically here, there's no record that the city ever accepted Marlene. The city has researched that and been unable to find any acceptance on record. And so, because this was proposed in 1964 and dedicated in 1964, it expired after 20 years unless it was accepted. Because it wasn't, we believe, and City Council has now opined, that the public rights automatically were extinguished at that time. I want to talk about a little bit later in my remarks why we still think we should be going through the discontinuance process, because the obvious question is, if there's no road, why are we here? Why are we listening to this petition? I think there are some very good reasons why the city should still do this and the board should still do this. But I first want to go through the reasons why this is important to my client, because that's obviously part of the analysis after you set aside the legal things. So I think first of all, remember that under the law, the abutters to a street own to the center line. That's the default to law. So if you abut a street, unless the street's owned by the city, the soil is owned by the city, which is rare, the abutters own to the center line. And the same is true when a road is dedicated. It's dedicated, it hasn't been accepted yet, it's a paper road, as they say, the abutters continue to own to the center line. So that's the case here. My client's property is to the center line of Marlene. So it is his private rights that are at issue here that we're balancing against the public. Marlene is, I think you can tell from those pictures, it's not used for vehicular travel. It's not a road in a traditional sense. You wouldn't drive a car down it. We acknowledge that there is some occasional use from folks in the neighborhood for walking down that area as a cut through between Quinton and Curtis Drive, and there is some opposition to this proposal for that reason, which is, pretty common. There's usually a small group of immediate neighbors who don't want to give up this public right, but we believe that the reasons for discontinuing outweigh that small benefit to a small group of people. First of all, obviously it wasn't intended as a walking path. It's a 50-foot wide road, much too large to be intended as a walking path, and that's the reason it was originally proposed, for frontage. It's not going to be used for that reason, and in fact, the planning board has said can't be used for that reason. It says not to be constructed on the plan note. So with that being the case, we don't think that it should continue to exist if not used for its original purpose. Second, keeping it as a public road does have ramifications for the city. The city could have responsibility to maintain the road. It could have liability for injuries that happen on the road because of defects. And those problems are avoided if the road is discontinued. Third, there are direct harms to my client and the other direct abutters. Again, there's 4 abutters that are directly abutting this road. As you can see from the photos, this area really is just in my client's yard. It's part of his yard. It's contiguous to his yard. And what happens, essentially, is that strangers keep walking through his yard. And I understand up until recently, it was believed to be a public way, but it's not maintained in that way. It's not designed in that way. And what happens, in effect, is that people are walking through other people's yards. And it presents issues or questions about safety, privacy, peace within the home. And where it's not intended to be used for this purpose, I don't think that it should continue to be used for that purpose. People walking by can drop trash that blows into my client's yard. There have been incidents where an unleashed dog gets loose and goes into my client's yard to use a bathroom. There was one incident where a dog went up to my client's dog and attacked it because, again, there's no regulations there, no protections there. So it exposes him to liability. It interferes with the use of his own property. So we believe that these harms to my client and the other abutters, as well as the potential liability and responsibility to the city, outweighs what we consider a pretty small public benefit to a very small group of people. I should note, the public benefit is getting between Quinton and Curtis Drives. You can do that if you walk 650 feet down the road to Ridge Road, which also connects the streets and has a sidewalk. So we're not talking about a huge time saver here. So I've talked about that, and I've talked about the legal piece of it. Now let me talk about, if we agree that this isn't a public road, why are we here? So I think that there is not a lot of clarity on this issue, is what I'd say. This all happened a long time ago. We're talking about negative inferences where we're saying the city didn't accept this road, but we have no proof that they rejected it because that's not required. And so there's always an open question about the status of the road. And there could be room for interpretation in the legal analysis. So that being the case, if the board takes a position that there's no road and doesn't do anything, it leaves a lot of unresolved questions. Like, for example, let's say someone's walking down that road and gets injured and in 10 years, and they say, we want to sue the city. And they go to court and they say, the city said this wasn't a road, but it is. And we're going to prove that, and they prove it. And now the city's liable for what happened. The city doesn't get to decide what is or what isn't a road. Only a court can really do that. So the city has issued an opinion, but the only way to definitively say that is for a discontinuance to happen. That way, if someone gets injured 10 years from now, A, we have a legal opinion it's not a road. B, we've been safe and we've discontinued it just to make sure. So it helps the city, it helps the parties involved, so there's no private disputes going forward that the city is necessarily going to be in the middle of and having to pick sides. This is the cleanest option. There's no downside. There's no reason the board can't say, we don't think that this is a road, but just to make sure, we're voting to discontinue any public rights that may exist. There's no downside to doing that, and it helps the city and it helps the people involved, the parties involved. It also, and just talking about the easement questions, as you can see on this plan note, although this revised plan says Marlane not to be constructed, it does contemplate that it could be used for future sanitary and drain easement. I would argue that those easements survive despite the road not surviving, but I think legal counsel would probably agree it's not entirely clear. What the city has now is an opportunity to confirm that. And that's because all 4 direct abutters, who again own the land, let's assume there's no road, they own the soil right now, all 4 direct abutters have agreed to sign an easement to the city confirming that they have a drainage easement, a sewer easement, and a turnaround easement. If this board does nothing and there's no road, the city might not have any of those rights. The only way to confirm that, grant the discontinuance under the conditions we've proposed, which includes acceptance of this easement, which is a voluntary act by the abutters that they've agreed to, and the city has agreed that they'd like to have. So the bottom line, the board may not have to discontinue, vote to discontinue, but to the extent there's any question marks, the board loses nothing by voting to discontinue it, and in fact, gains benefits downstream, helps clear up this matter for good, and really is the prudent and fair option in our opinion. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So we'll have a legal opinion by the next infrastructure meeting, and we will comply with whatever legal sends down to us. So we don't, this is a, we don't, I don't think.
No, we don't.
We don't take questions. and
Unpublic.
It's not a two-way dialogue. So if there's anyone else that would like to speak in favor of this street discontinuance, please come to the microphone and give your name and address.
How's everybody doing? Thank you. I want to thank everybody for listening to our
Name
petition.
and address for the record, please.
Yes, my name is Juan Ocasio, and I'm the owner of 15 Quinton Drive. We first moved into this location. It's a beautiful location, a beautiful lot, beautiful house, beautiful neighborhood, very quiet. It was to our understanding that by the previous owners of this property, that we had the option to purchase that piece of land there, which is why I started this process. With all the research and seeking and talking to people, I found out that discontinuance will be an option. But through our research, we also found out that this road was never accepted by the city. So of course, as you heard from my attorney, he pointed out that, you know, it's something that we kind of want because we want the privacy, we want this, I feel safer for my family, especially with the development that's going on in the area, strangers walking through. And I feel like it's in the best interest for the discontinuance to happen, for us to have a peace of mind, continue to live there, enjoy our home. And I couldn't think of anything, any other property where I like to write it out with my wife and my son and pass it on to my son when it's time for me to move on. I hope that you take in consideration everything that's been said here tonight and move forward with the discontinuance of Martin Lane for the safety of our families and for the liability risk to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak in favor of this?
Good evening. I'm Amy Blomeke at 11 Quinton Drive. So I'm also in favor of the discontinuance. I just have a few important points that speak to the fact that we're looking to maintain the septic and drainage easements, specifically related to the fact that we are in a rural zoning area and we all are on septic systems. However, Curtis Drive has a force main septic line, or sewer line in it, and we're looking for potential future connections specifically related to the long-term impacts of the Cherrywood development and the elevated groundwaters that we're all seeing nowadays, and stormwater runoff associated with Cherrywood and how that's impacted Quinton Drive and the drainage easement that currently exists, which is an open drainage swale. So looking potentially in the future for the city to consider addressing septic connections in Quinton Drive, and also looking to have the city evaluate the current open drainage swale that is between our properties, and looking for the city to potentially change that to a closed system, which could then divert off into the adjacent brook. And then just again, from a septic perspective, we likely don't have many options going forward, as you know, you see that these plans were built in the 70s. Some of us are on our second or third septic system, and with the higher groundwater, we don't really have room to even put in a secondary leach field or a third leach field at this time. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who wants to speak in favor? Seeing no one, is there anyone who wants to speak in opposition?
Hi, thank you. My name's Mike Mushigan. I live at 12 Quinton Drive. I'm here tonight with my wife, Kimberly. And we'd ask you to reject the proposed discontinuance of Mara Lane. I was born and raised here in Nashua, and I had a great career with the Nashua Police Department. My wife was a science teacher at Nashua High, and I just want to assure you the only reason we're here tonight is because we do care about Nashua, and we hope the decisions we make tonight will be the best thing for the city going forward. Now, I've never been an alderman. I'm sure it's a balancing act for you, balancing the public interest versus the private interest. I think the private interest is pretty clear. I know if I was one of the abutters, I would love to increase the size and value of my property, but I'd like to focus on what the public interest is tonight. So Kimberly and I have lived on Quinton Drive for nearly 27 years, and I don't know what was happening back in 1965 or 1985, but I can tell you in the time we've been on Quinton Drive, there's been a very rich and active history of public use of Mara Lane. In fact, when my children were young and they attended public school, their bus would travel on Mara Lane. Again, not in 1960s or 70s or 80s, but actually in 2006, 7, 8, 9, around that time frame, the bus would travel down Mara Lane and the city would plow it, DPW. As a Nashua police officer, I can tell you Nashua Police patrolled Mara Lane and drove our cruisers on Mara Lane, circuiting the Curtis Drive, Mara Lane, and Quinton Drive. So it has been extensively used as a road throughout its history. The neighborhood kids played on Mara Lane, and many people in the neighborhood walked their dogs or rode their bikes down the lane, and it was a really nice feature to have on a dead-end street. Now, it's my understanding, I wish Alderman O'Brien was here, he would know better than me, but it's my understanding that a city street in Nashua, if it's a dead end, it can't exceed 1,000 feet. And that's for fire safety rules. Perhaps the road could be blocked, or for one reason or another, the fire department would have to access the road from another direction. Now, admittedly, Quinton Drive is not 1,000 feet long, but it's approximately 700 feet long. So I would say in the interest of safety, I don't know why we'd want to discontinue the potential of using Mara Lane in the future. So again, I ask you to reject the discontinuance. But if you disagree, and Attorney Pedro did a great job of outlining his interest, I would ask that an easement be established permitting the public's continued right of access. There's been talk about an easement for the vehicle turnaround, an easement for the sewer, and for the water drainage. I think it'd be appropriate to have an easement for public access to continue to be using the Mara Lane, just like my wife and I and other people have used, again, for me, for the past 27 years. I think this will continue to be important in the future. If you look at the planned development of the Camp Doucette property, the Brian McCarthy Middle School, I don't think the city needs to be getting rid of footpaths and bike paths. I think it's a great feature for the city. I think it's one thing that Nashua is known for, and we should encourage it going forward. And it wouldn't be a standalone path either. If we were to have an easement, right at the end of Curtis Drive, there's a trailhead that's maintained by the city that goes off towards Buck Meadow, Lovewell Pond, Udickie Farm. It's a whole network of paths, which is, again, a great asset to the city. So, I don't want to obstruct change. I know change is inevitable. I grew up in Nashua, probably like many of you. I remember, my favorite restaurants on Daniel Webster Highway used to be Shakey's Pizza and, the Greenridge Turkey Farm. And, change is going to happen. I just hope that, I'm 56 years old. I won't be here another 50 years, but maybe 50 years from now, the decisions we make today will be beneficial to the city in the future. And I hope, people will still have access to that right-of-way that has existed. Again, maybe, I don't know in terms of what legality, but it's been there for all this time. It'd be a shame to lose that. So that's about it. I really appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak in opposition? Seeing no one, is there anyone that would like to, once again, speak in favor?
Very briefly, just want to respond to a couple things. We certainly, I just want to clarify, are opposed to the concept of a public easement for, I assume, pedestrian traffic. That would defeat the entire purpose of what we're proposing here today. Obviously, the area is not currently used for vehicular traffic, and so the status quo is it's used for pedestrian traffic, which is what we're asking the city to stop. So that's not splitting the baby. It wouldn't be splitting the baby to discontinue the road but maintain a public easement. That would just completely defeat the purpose. I'd also say that it also exemplifies one of the issues with the current legal status of the road, because if it's not a road, the city, of course, can't grant a public easement over it without the consent of the abutting landowners. That's why what we're proposing is, I think, the only foolproof solution, because we have the 4 abutting landowners who are willing to grant the city utility easements and turnaround easement, which, regardless of the status of the road, whether it's a road or not, they can do that, and the aldermen can accept that. So we do think that that's the most clear-cut proposal. Briefly on fire suppression, this was reviewed by the fire department, and my understanding is they don't have any concerns about that, the discontinuance impacting fire suppression. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak once again in favor? Seeing no one, is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition? Again, this will be taken up at the next infrastructure meeting on March 20.
I think there was somebody that wanted to speak again.
Somebody that wanted to speak again?
No, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
All right. March 27th?
Yeah, March 27th, yeah.
March 27th, the final action will be taken on this. So I'd like to,
And they can each speak 3 minutes at that time.
yeah,
Only.
at that meeting, you'll have 3 minutes to speak a public comment. So I'll make a motion to close the public hearing at 7:32 PM. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll now go right into the regular meeting. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Sure. Alderman Chris Thibodeau,
Here.
Alderman John Sullivan, Alderman Patricia Cleese here, Alderman Richard Dowd,
Present.
and Alderman Mike O'Brien.
Okay.
And we have 3 in attendance. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Both times, yes, we have also in attendance, we have Alderman Thibault and Alderman Govea.
Okay. Is there anyone that wants to speak in public comment before we go into the next part of the agenda? Anything that's on the agenda this evening only? Seeing no one? Before we go into an update on the Hunt Building, if there's no objection, it's been asked that we go out of order to take up the item, the tabled in committee L. Dearwood Drive item. A motion, Alderman Cleese?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I motion to remove from the table the petition L. Deerwood Drive, lot H103.
Okay, the motion is taken off the table. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It's now on the table, and.
Do you want me to make the next motion?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I motion to recommend passage of the petition L. Deerwood Drive, lot H103.
Okay, is there anyone here did Alderman Govea, did you want to give an overview, or is there somebody that wants to give an overview, or do we just want to take comments?
To me, it was just the take comments. I think everybody here is aware of what the project is, so I think it was brought to our attention that we just wanted to kind of bring up to speed and make sure we give an update on where we are and where we're at.
Is there anyone in the audience who wants to give come up and speak to this? Please name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Daniel Muller from Cronin Bisson Zelinski. I represent Vivian Jean Adams, the owner of the property. Since we were last before this committee, we sat down with Director Sullivan, Mr. Lynch from the airport in an effort to see if we could sell the property either to the city or to the airport. The indication was that the airport was not in a position currently to be able to purchase the property. We had understood there may have been an effort to have the city purchase it, but we did not hear anything further on that. And therefore, we asked that the matter be taken off the table. My client has had health issues. She has owned this property for a long period of time and is simply looking to dispose of it or be able to dispose of it to somebody who can build a single-family house on it. If the committee has any questions, either with respect to the petition itself or with respect to the status, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this?
Hi, good evening. Chris Lynch, Airport Manager, Nashua Airport. As we've stated in the past, I guess I'll just restate it. We, as the airport authority, we vehemently oppose the development of residential housing abutting an airport. A lot of important factors here. First of all, we have the busiest airport in the state. I have the second busiest airport in New England for general aviation. This is very important to a community, and to have an airport that of this magnitude right here in Nashua is huge for the community. There was studies have been, excuse me, studies have been done where the airport brings in tens of millions of dollars into the city and the surrounding communities annually. So it's a very big deal, and if you look at it, the FAA discourages residential development abutting airports. And the reason being is the more residential developments you have around airports, the more people get together and they oppose airports. They don't like noise, not in my backyard kind of thing. And there have been airports in this country that have actually been shut down because of these activities. And so for the sake of the city granting this approval for one lot, one home, over tens of millions of dollars pumping into the city annually is not a good decision. Furthermore, if this is granted, the airport has safety and security concerns, more security concerns. Opening up this street in the back of the airport that's essentially out in the woods is inviting trouble. And it also puts a burden on the city's police department, Department of Public Works, fire department, and I can tell you most of all, it would be on the police department having to patrol it. And again, security for the airport, it goes further than just worrying about who's going to be hanging out there at night and doing whatever. It's further down the road, I have what's called an RPZ, a runway protection zone, that goes right through Deerwood. And it is currently closed at, I can't remember the name, what's the crossing? There's a crossing out there. Yeah. So it's closed right there. And if we open up this road, now people have unrestricted access. So we'd be forced to put up a gate and a fence. And I can tell you right now that the latest gate that I put up at the airport was $40,000 just for a gate. We have to bring electricity out there. We have to bring fencing out there. I've had an estimate for approximately $150,000 to do all that. And I would be seeking assistance from the city for that. As the airport essentially is owned by the city, it is owned by the city. We have all the infrastructure projects that go on at the city, that go on at the airport. I rely on federal funding coming in. And we don't have anything programmed in for this because we thought this would never happen. A lot out in the middle of the woods that's surrounded by conservation land just didn't make sense, and we thought it would never happen. So I would be looking to the city to somehow either pay for or help pay for this gate and this fence to be put up. So right there, you have about 150,000. That's, could be a weak estimate with COVID and everything, prices going up on everything. So it was brought up at the last meeting that, you know, perhaps a deal should be struck where the city or the Conservation Committee makes a purchase of this land from Miss Adams. I also understand that the asking price was approximately $300,000, which I think is probably a bit high, but an appraisal needs to be done. Anybody that's going to seek federal funding or state or city funding, you would have to have an appraisal done. So I recommend that the city would get an appraisal on this property if they choose to move forward with this. I also recommend to the property owners to have an appraisal done. The airport, purchased a property on Pine Hill Road recently, and the seller had an appraisal done. I had 2 appraisals done, and the state had an appraisal done. Because I went for federal funding, I had to get all these appraisals. And basically, if you're gonna get any federal funding, and the city, I'm sure, accepts federal funding, it has to have an appraisal, and it has to be within 10% of that appraisal. And I would be hard-pressed to believe that this appraisal will come in at $300,000. That's just my opinion for what it's worth, but I think that if this plan does move forward, the city needs to think seriously about helping protect the airport and purchasing this land. I cannot do it. I explained this at the last meeting. I have spent all the extra money that we have on this other property. I will be reimbursed from the federal government, but who knows when, because it was planned in the future. I have also put this property right now on our capital improvement plan, but the problem is, if I were to get reimbursed for this, it would probably be about 10 years before I could see money from the federal government. We've already been told that in years 27 through 29, there will be no discretionary funding coming into the New England region. So I have 3 years of nothing. I have infrastructure projects stacked up at the airport already. We, the airport, cannot afford to do this right now. We essentially operate as a nonprofit organization. It's in the charter that we are not there to make a profit. We have to make money, but not a profit. All of the profits that are generated by the airport go into the surrounding community and the city. Furthermore, the tenants of the airport contribute approximately $800,000 annually in city taxes to the city. So I think that in this case, as much as I would love to say, I'd love to help out and purchase the property, I just can't. My hands are tied. If it comes to that, I implore the city to do the right thing and either deny the project, or if it has to move forward, I think, you know, allowing this development out there is counterproductive to the airport that is such a staple to the city of Nashua. So I could go on for days on this, and I'll spare you, but if anybody has any questions.
Do you know, is that in the clear zone, side clear zone of the runway?
Where the El Deerwood property is, yes, it is not in the RPZ. It is outside of the runway protection zone. The RPZ is a trapezoid that goes off the end of the runway, expands out and up. I don't know the exact dimensions of it. I could show you on a map at some point, but it is outside of it. But Deerwood itself is in it, and I have to protect that. My precision instrument landing system, lighting system is out there. It's already forbidden for people to be out there. There are some people that walk their pets out there, and they actually keep an eye on the place and report to me if they see anything going on. But as far as vehicular traffic, there is none other than the airport authority vehicles patrolling the property. And it's that, when I say a critical landing system approach, for those of you that aren't familiar, and I know, Alderman Dowd, you are familiar, but as former chairman of the airport authority, the precision approach allows the aircraft I'll put it in layman's terms, in really bad weather, to come down on instruments to a very low altitude, a couple hundred feet, and still be able to make it into that runway with the vertical and lateral guidance from the instrument landing system. If that system had any interference, it could cause people to lose their lives. So it's we have to protect that area in the airport. But again, our biggest concern is security and the fact that allowing residential development is, historically detrimental to the survivability of airports across the entire nation. I feel for Ms. Adams. I understand, in speaking with these gentlemen that, she made an investment. I have to agree with one of the aldermen at the last meeting. I think it probably wasn't a good investment, buying a piece of land out there in the middle of the woods, but nonetheless, I think that she feels she has a right to sell it and make some money on it. I don't know how much money, but that'd be up to an appraisal and whoever was going to purchase it. So.
Any
other-
questions for Chris? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else would like to speak on this subject?
Just a couple of minutes. Good evening. My name is Anna Rombishuv. I am at 9 Massasoit Road. We are the neighborhood. We're the human side. We're the human side of the airport. We're those pet owners and walkers and joggers and hunters and parents who raise their children in that wood, teaching them about the wood. We're the ones who indulge in seeing deer families growing in our backyards, walking right straight through our backyards. We're the ones who greet Chris every morning with our dogs, very chastely, walking in our ways, not interfering with the equipment. And of course, if any of you had been at the end of the Massasoit Road, you know that snow plows plow the snow there. So if the road continues down further, it's going to have to go to the conservation land. Nashua is a gem, and the reason why Nashua is a gem of a city is because we have those lungs. We can breathe because anyone who ever visited me from all the states of the United States and from variety of, you can tell by my accent, English is not my native language, people who travel from all over the world, they all comment, this neighborhood breathes differently. Where it's, as Justice Chris mentioned, developing, allowing this foothold into the development will jeopardize the sanctity of the conservation land. It's a first drop. Everyone in a neighborhood, people coming from the Blackfoot Road and everyone else on the other side, we all know each other. Pretty much majority of us own dogs. We pick up every poop because of that. Because we believe in, true, it's true. We know our dogs by the poop. So, but it is what it is. And we very much, as members of the refined capitalist society, we understand the misfortune of poor investment. And with the different estimation, whatever the price tag on that property, I'm not a real estate assessor, but it just for me as a normal human being, it's a bit strange, the price tag. And I mean, I would think to some degree, just like we put together money to hire a lawyer and then, people to get involved, we're not that opposed to the idea to look into that as well, to help out the airport to secure this land and just have it as a conservation land. This is our forever homes. For most of us who lives in that area, it's our forever homes. And it matters. So.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak?
My name's Frank Goodspeed. I live at 120 Walnut Street in Nashua native, and thank you for doing everything that you do for us. I've known Jane for 30 years. She's 80 years old. She bought this property in 1990, and she started talking about doing something with this parcel about 5 years ago. So we went to get it rezoned, but Keach and Nordstrom was our engineer, and he said, listen, and I know this area, you guys know this area, it's an executive area, it's a beautiful area. We don't want to change we didn't want to change anything, we wanted to complement it. So that's why we went for one lot. It's an R18 area there, so one lot, you got 3.7 acres of land. We'd love to sell it to the airport, we'd love to sell it to these people. We had 2 offers on it at $300,000 apiece. Unfortunately, because we weren't able to get the final approvals of everything, we had to let those offers go. So I just wanted to let you know where that is on that. Again, we're not asking for anything that's, we're not changing the neighborhood at all. As a matter of fact, if you go down the other end of the area there, you got Mr. Tamposi's daughter who built a gorgeous house, and I would think that this would be type of a home that would be put if you allow this there. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just be very brief. Again, Daniel Muller from Cronin Business Zelensky. I just want to speak to some of the issues in terms of security that were raised. Technically, as it currently stands, and this is part of the reason why we sat down with the city staff and Mr. Lynch from the airport. It's my understanding that that road, which was Blood Crossings Road originally, the road dates back to the 1700s, is a Class 6 road. That means it's still a public highway. And technically, you cannot block off a public highway. There's a case called Marone versus Town of Hampton. The complication would be, of course, the answer that usually is, well, just go and discontinue that road. Other portions of Deerwood Drive, AKA Blood Crossings Road, have been discontinued by the city over the years. But as you heard in your last presentation, the default in this state is that the abutters would own to the center line, which means that the road that they use for security is technically on what would be Miss Adams' property. So if that disappeared, they still would have an issue with their road being on the property. So, as Mr. Goodspeech has indicated, and as I indicated, we tried to go down that route. It did not work. My client has owned this for years. Like everyone else, she has property rights as well, and is looking to dispose of it so that somebody can build on it, because that's the highest and best use. This is a residential area. There has been talk of, issues, but again, this is a single lot. Most of the property in that area is in conservation and is subject to conservation restrictions. This is one of the few that is not. And as we indicated earlier, in the last presentation here, both the fire department and the Public Works Department have looked at this. They've made some suggestions. We have indicated in terms of assuring emergency vehicle access and the like, and as we've already indicated, we are willing to follow the recommendations of the fire department and the Public Works Department. Some of those recommendations depend upon the house that's built. For example, if it's sprinklered, certain things would not have to be done, but the design would be up to whoever bought it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. If there's no one else who would like the committee, Alderman Govia, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Yeah, excuse me.
Hi, my name is Holly Hart. I live at 17 Massasoit Road. I wrote the Board of Aldermen a letter a while ago. I do hope that you review that with all my concerns. One of my concerns is the drainage, because the road goes straight down like that, and from what I read on the surveying, it's going to be going up like that. But where is all that water going to go? And it is going to open up a lot of traffic that goes down in that area. A lot of it is blocked now because it is a dead end. And to Chris's concerns, yes, there are going to be people that go down there. Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Govia? Oh, you want to?
I just want to clarify my issue, sorry. Chris Lynch, Airport Manager. I speak of the airport, but I think there was just discussion about this being a residential neighborhood. The airport is zoned airport industrial, and that, that covers a lot of bases. I think Matt could speak to what that really means, but understand that we process material out there. We hunt out there. We have an obligation for the safety of the airport. We have wildlife depredation permits to take care of deer, avian issues, geese, turkeys, et cetera. And there's a lot of that goes on out there, kind of behind the scenes, but it's for the safety of the public. And again, developing residential homes against airport industrial property hinders our ability to take care of these things that are life-critical items.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Alderman Govia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My opinion on the matter at hand really hasn't changed at all since we've last met when I was used to be on the committee as well. And I think it's a issue that myself, I know you have, I know Director Sullivan's been pulled into some of it, I know Mr. Lynch has, is with airport noise from constituents who live in that vicinity of the airport. And I can't imagine anybody who's gonna buy this property wouldn't find that rather, that kind of a surprise, because I hear it all the time from people in that direct area. I think this is personally conservation land at best. I think that's the best use of this. I would please ask my colleagues on the committee to vote down the current motion so a new one can be made, and we can just kind of move that way. I feel there's other options that we can follow that would allow both parties to be satisfied. I feel by granting this petition, we open up a lot of doors, and obviously having the airport in my ward as well as our constituents, my constituents over here, that this is not in the best interest of what we would like Ward 1 to be like. And for those reasons, with a lot of stakeholders here tonight and a lot of stakeholders here of what we had at our past meeting, I would please ask that the committee vote down the current motion and make a new one. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Director
Chair.
Sullivan.
I wanted to offer just a few comments relative to the discussion this evening. I do think there's been a blending of two separate conversations related to this property, and I respect that because frankly they're blended in my mind as well. And the two issues at hand really are the purchase of the property or the acquisition of the property by the city and the request to issue a building permit on a Class 6 road. And I think I was actually just reflecting back on the minutes of the committee meeting, which believe it or not took place back on June 18th, or June 28th rather, as far as I can see, perhaps even earlier. In fact, there were several questions that the committee had based on correspondences from the abutters and from staff and conversations that evening that they required clarification on, including whether or not the FAA had a formal position on the construction of a dwelling on the property and other safety security issues, and whether or not the conditions that had been laid out by fire and engineering were in fact acceptable. And I think Attorney Mueller has represented this evening that they are, but the reality is that there were other questions raised at that hearing. And I don't believe that the lack of progress on the city's acquisition of the property is an adequate response to those questions. And so I'm going to plead with you this evening, in spite of the request by the petitioner to take this off the table. I would recommend that if this committee is preparing to make a motion to deny, I would respectfully request that staff have an opportunity to draft a set of conditions for consideration. And the reason I raise this is that there are specific criteria through which the committee needs to view this request and a specific basis upon which you need to make a denial motion. And I'll be the first one to admit that I wish I had had those prepared for this evening. I did not. But the idea that you'll simply deny or recommend against the petition without a set of laid out reasons for doing so does concern me. We can certainly try and walk through that this evening. I'm not saying that can't be done, but I had laid out a set of questions to the planning board in a memorandum back in January of 2023 that I'd want to pose to you as you consider potentially a motion to deny the petition or to not recommend the petition rather to the Board of Aldermen. But again, I do want to maybe take a moment to address the city's acquisition of the property, and I have great respect for Attorney Mueller and Mr. Goodspeed and for their client. We did have internal conversation about the potential acquisition of the property, and while I think that's not germane to the discussion this evening, there was a lack of comfort with the proposed purchase price. I take full responsibility for not pursuing an appraisal for that. That was a calculation or a decision made by me exclusively, and so I accept responsibility for not moving in that direction. But I'm also acutely aware of the other capital and other needs that the city has, and my decision was at that time not to proceed. I certainly am happy to pursue that at a future time if that's something that the Board of Aldermen would like to do, or the mayor would like to do, but that's why I did not move forward in that direction. I'll also just note quickly that the planning board ultimately made a recommendation, and really they condition it upon further consideration of this property being conservation by this committee. I don't think that's necessarily under your jurisdiction, and so while I think it's a consideration, if anyone has gone back and looked at that recommendation, I'm not sure it's something that the committee should consider this evening, so I just wanted to note that for the record. But again, I'll close by saying that I believe that if this committee, the flavor is to potentially not recommend the petition for approval by the Board of Aldermen, I'd like to either walk through a set of questions this evening for you to consider, or I'd like an opportunity to perhaps come back with both an approval and a denial motion for you to consider that involves some substantive findings of fact that could then be defended in the event that the petitioner is not satisfied with the board's denial. And I apologize for being so frank about that, but I think there needs to be a legal protection against this committee's recommendation and the board's action ultimately if the vote is not to grant the building permit. I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you. I agree with everything you just said. I also want to make another comment, and I don't know if this would be appropriate. And it's not a recommendation, it's just a comment I want to make. There was a piece of land in Ward 3 that was going to be purchased and developed, and it's not the property you're thinking of. While it's close to that property, it is not that property. But the neighbors were very concerned about this being developed and so on. It had become, and it's known now as Neighbors Field. The neighbors within that area actually purchased it. It went into a trust, they, kind of put in and so on like that. And they protected it. They put a covenant in that says it could not be developed and so on. And while I am very protective of the city's money, and I realize that at this point, every dollar counts, because every time we spend something, we are hitting the taxpayers for it. Right now, I'm not comfortable with the city necessarily buying this property. But I wonder if neighbors and so on would consider trying to do this, maybe having it appraised on that level and so on. And I just want to put that comment out there. And to be honest with you, we call it Neighbors Field, and they have a football game there every Thanksgiving. It's the north side of, or the east and west side of Concord Street that kind of play in that field. But it's just something, it's an idea, and it kind of became a protected land through covenants and so on. It's a major legal encumbrance and a financial one to those, but it's something that they will always own as a group. So I just want to put that out there. I don't know if where this property is, if something like that would even be allowed or that, so.
I can't directly address that question, Mr. Chair, but what I did just quickly want to note, I am sensitive to the requester's timeline and the fact that they've been tabled for 9 months in front of this committee. And so I suppose I would, to the extent that I can, request that if there is a tabling to allow for drafting of motions, that it would be to the next meeting, and that this committee would agree to take this matter up. If that's something that you're agreeable to, provided that staff can provide some sort of conditions. Or again, I'd be happy to walk through some of these questions that I think need to be analyzed by the committee and do that this evening. I'm happy to do whatever your pleasure is.
Alderman Gavia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the comments from Director Sullivan, I would probably walk back my recommendation to deny tonight. I don't feel that's fair to put him on the spot to walk us through these questions now. I'd rather give him at least a little bit of time to thoroughly think of them and not put him on the spot on what is a larger task and more important task to do. But with that being said, I don't want to see this dragged out another 6 months. I do have a lot of respect for both of the gentlemen here tonight who have followed this along, and I don't feel that's fair to, if we were to keep this on the table till June, and then we're here in June again. I mean, if we table, I would like to see the language for both a motion to accept and a motion to deny by the next meeting. That way we can slowly start to come to a conclusion on this project that I feel has been dragged out for a long time now. And with that being said, of what I heard from my colleague from Ward 3, I think that those are all very reasonable options that we could look at. I don't feel one way or another right now personally of if we should buy it or if we shouldn't, but at this time I would strongly advocate against the current petition, and then we could look at other options. But I feel tabling right now would be our best.
I want to speak before any motions are made. You have a comment, Alderman Tebow?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not on this committee, but obviously I would vote if it goes to the full board. I would not want to put any property there at all. I think what Mr. Lynch has said is 100% right. But I'm not necessarily for the city buying it either, because when you buy it, you're also losing the taxes on it too. It's not just the purchase price. So that would be another thing that we have to figure out, but I wouldn't put any property on there. Thank you.
So, I was on the airport authority for 15 years, chairman for many of those. And we spent an inordinate amount of time buying property to get residential houses away from the airport. And I think we've pretty much bought all the ones on Pine Hill now. There may be one left. Because we always were getting pushback from FAA about not having either residential houses or places where people are gathering, like we couldn't have any schools on the airport, dance schools or whatever, because of the danger of being that close to the airport. I'm also concerned that Chris sort of brought it up a little bit, there's millions of dollars of equipment at the end of that runway that belongs to the FAA, and then they've always wanted to get people as far away as possible from the runways. In this instance, I don't think it's a good idea to open the door for residential any closer to the airport than it already is. And so I would only support one of two motions. One, to table to give Director Sullivan time to come up with something, or to deny. So I'm open to any motions that want to be made. Alderman Cleen?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to motion to table this petition until the next Committee of the Infrastructure meeting of 3/27/2024, what the provision that Director Sullivan will bring to this committee a list of both questions to be answered for both approval and denial.
All right, motion on the floor, any discussion on the motion?
You can't have a discussion at table, request a table.
Oh, table motion, I'm sorry.
No, there's no discussion.
All in favor of the tabling motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries, it's tabled to March 27th. All right,
Did I have to pull back my approval? I never even thought of it. No, I don't.
No.
Not with the table. No.
now, so now we're gonna have a discussion on the Hunt Building repairs. Must have been something you said, Amy.
It must have been.
The ability to clear a room.
I lost my audience. The entertainer in me is just outraged.
Director Sullivan?
You'll be
I
back.
don't know if you'll be in contact, but we have
His stick.
Attorney Pietro's.
Yes,
Yes.
I'd be happy to grab that.
Can't get it out of the machine.
And I'll be coming back to speak to something.
Okay.
All right. Do you have slides or anything? You're just gonna talk to, okay.
No, I'm here briefly just to give you an update. So, for the record, Amy DeRoche, Economic Development Project Manager. We had funds approved back in December to do some restoration and renovation to the Hunt. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys an update as far as where we are thus far. The best part so far is that the heat in the bathrooms has been restored. So very, very excited about that. It took way less than we anticipated it taking as far as what needed to be done. It turned out to be some sort of frozen actuator and the wrong type of thermostat. So
less cost.
less cost, which we greatly appreciate considering everything else. The RFP to get the pipe removed from the chimney is currently out on the street. It's turning out to be probably a bigger endeavor than we thought that it was going to be, considering it appears that the pipe was bricked into place when the chimney was constructed. So they put in a 10-foot section and they bricked around it, and they put in a 10-foot section and they bricked around it. So it's not going to be as easy as we would like to think it is to just lift it out with a crane. So we're waiting to see what the bids come back at to get it taken out, but we're also consulting our structural engineers that are working on the windows to see if there's a way to just shore up the bottom of the pipe so that we don't actually have to remove it. The problem being that the pipe is made of cast iron and you can't weld to it, so it makes that process more challenging. We'll find out. I should hopefully hear from my structural engineers by the end of the week and see when they can come out and take a look at the pipe. So there's that. The tower windows, the design drawings are almost complete for the windows and also the replacement of the two security doors that we have to have done. So we should have that out to bid probably the second week in March. We've been kind of putting feelers out to people who build these type of windows, and we're hearing that it could be between 8 and 10 months lead time to get them built. So we might be looking at actual construction next season, but at least by putting it out to bid in March, we'll be on the calendar. And as soon as the weather cooperates, we can just start construction and have everything ready to go. So that's where we are at the moment.
Any questions for anyone? Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you're gonna go sleep over there tonight, because the rain's gonna come in. And you got your buckets ready. I just wanna thank you. This is a building that probably within 20 to 30 years, people that will be passing on that once used it as a library, and we're gonna forget how important this building was to the city and how, just it's on so much of the landscape of the city. And I think, I'm glad we have somebody protecting it and somebody there making sure that it continues to carry on as one of the jewels of the city. So thank you for that, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions, Chris? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. All right, next item on the agenda is communications. Alderman Glee.
Yeah, I know, I'm trying to, I don't think she put anything in, did she? Yeah. You have to say this without objection.
Without objection, I'd like to suspend the rules to accept communications that were inadvertently left off the agenda.
Do you want me to read them?
Yeah.
From Sam Durfee, Planning Manager, in regards to referral from the Board of Aldermen on proposed petition for street discontinuance Mar Lane. From, pardon me for butchering this name, Yuda Chowdhury, owner of 13 Curtis Drive, Mar Lane, regards to Mar Lane, opposed to discontinuance of Mar Lane. From Andrea Pierce, 14 Curtis Drive, in regards to Mar Lane in support to discontinuance of Mar Lane.
There being no objection, I'd like to accept the communication and place them on file. Unfinished business,
There is none?
new business resolutions,
There is none.
new business ordinances.
Yes. Ordinance 24-001, authorizing a stop sign on 12th Street at its intersection and Will Street. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend approval.
Did we accept
We
the
didn't-
Wayne Hudson's?
No, I didn't know if you wanted to do that afterwards, or you want to do this
We
before?
do that now.
Okay, I'm going to back that one off and pull that one back. Do you want to just say There being no objection.
There being no objections, we'd like to accept a piece of communications from Wayne Hudson, traffic manager for the city of Nashua. It was arrived after the agenda was prepared,
Do I need to read it into the record at all? or-
just the title.
Okay. From Wayne Husband, physical engineer, senior traffic engineer, subject ordinance O-24-001, authorizing a stop sign on 12th Street at its intersection with Will Street.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage. Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. All please.
Ordinance 24-004, regards to establishing the School Street parking garage. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend final approval.
The motion on the floor is to recommend to the full board final passage of O-24-004, establishing the School Street parking garage. Director Sullivan, did you want to talk to any of that?
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to, Mr. Chair. Happy to briefly address this here on behalf of Director Hannum and Manager Stansfield of the Parking Department. This is an ordinance that formally establishes the public parking garage located between the newly built and partially occupied High Street Flats building over here near to the Performing Arts Center, adjacent to the River Casino. This was, again, a public-private partnership that produced a building above a public parking garage in the interest of preserving some level of public parking in the location that it existed in before. But in order to formally execute this and implement this, there are, in fact, some legislative actions that have to take place, and those are laid out here. Specifically, and I'm going to go a little bit out of order from what you see in the ordinance, within 32048 of the city code, there needs to be a new zone, Zone 4, established, which is hereby titled the School Street Parking Garage. And then more interestingly, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about the basis for this, but there actually needs to be within 320-47, which is the fee section of the ordinance, an established fee specifically for Zone 4. And here, the proposal, and I can talk about the basis of this if the committee is interested, is for a $2 per hour rate for the first 3 hours, and then $4 per hour for the fourth hour, and any hour thereafter that the space is occupied. Those fees are thereby established within 320-47. And then lastly, on the second page of the ordinance, there is a restriction on the number of consecutive hours and the hours that Zone 4 or the School Street Garage can be used. And specifically, 24 hours a day, daily, including Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays with no time limit is what's established here, so very limited restrictions. But again, the overall action here is to establish a new zone known as the School Street Parking Garage, to establish fees associated with that, and to address any specific time limits that may be placed on it. I'll address just quickly, if the committee is interested, if you had looked at the fee section of the ordinance, you'd notice that several of the other zones around the city, 1, 2, and 3, they're significantly lower. This is a protected, enclosed, indoor parking garage, and so we actually received recommendations from Desmond and Andy Hill, who you're all very familiar with, on what that number should look like based on what we're seeing in the market right now, and it being sort of a premium level of parking downtown. And so that's why this number is substantially higher than what you'd see in other sections of the ordinance. It's the sort of the highest level of available parking downtown. And of course, it's the only asset that's fully weatherized located in the downtown core as well. Even the parking garages have a level of exposure. So happy to try and address any questions that the committee has, but
So the time, is that geared by, you get a ticket when you go in, and when you go out, it registers how long you've been there?
So it will be, you'll sort of have a pay kiosk, as I understand it. There is a gating structure there, but it's going to be configured the same way that our other parking lots are. Alderman Dowd, you're asking a very good question, and I fear I can't answer exactly how the time limit will be metered on the app or the kiosk, but it will be, and I'm not sure exactly how that's done, but it will be registered in the same way that all of our other public parking assets are either with the app or with a kiosk station that's installed over there.
The reason that I asked the question is I saw the potential revenue that we're gonna gain from it, and I was just wondering how that's gonna be calculated if nobody knows how long the people will park there.
There are reasonable assumptions that serve as the basis for that. I mean, the expectation is that there be some level of fluidity of folks parking in the garage. There's sort of an average stay calculation that's done. I'll admit fully I can't speak to that basis, but we expect that the revenues will be adequate and substantial, quite frankly, to other parking, more substantial than other parking assets. But I think it does, this is a totally subjective comment, but it raises the standard of public parking in the downtown. And I'm hoping that it sort of paves the way for some of the upgrades that are contemplated as part of the other parking garage assets that there are in the downtown core. And while we're not going to be at this level perhaps with a fully enclosed structure, I think this represents a new standard that we're all really, really excited about.
My only other question is, who's responsible for maintaining the garage, and is part of the revenue from this going to go towards maintaining the garage?
So those are good questions. My understanding is that the garage will be maintained, I believe, by the parking department, and I'd be happy to confirm that. I can probably confirm it while we're sitting here today. I did just want to note for the record, now that I'm recalling, the app will be the only available payment option within that location. There will not be a kiosk in the beginning. We expect there may be some challenges, but there may not be. We're trying that new model out within the garage location. Relative to the maintenance, my understanding is that it will be maintained by the parking department, and the revenues, that's a little bit nuanced, it being within the TIF district, obviously. But the expectation is that they will be partially directed back to the parking asset itself and any necessary maintenance.
Since we've had issues with maintenance of other garages, I think
Certainly.
we need to make sure that that's addressed.
And yes, I'll just say yes. I actually think this garage represents the piloting of a very interesting concept, and that is sort of a self-contained revenue expense structure that I know that Director Hannum and others are talking about in the context of the establishment of an enterprise fund, which I think is very interesting. And so this garage represents maybe a self-contained version of that.
Any other questions? Alderman Clee?
Thank you. To Alderman Dowd's comments and questions, I'm assuming that like any other parking space, our parking department will still be monitoring to make sure that if they're using the app or however this is going to be handled, they'll know when something has expired.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. So we're still responsible for the enforcement mechanism. We'll have access to do that enforcement within the building because it's a public facility, and so it will be accessible to the public. And the building above is fully aware of that, and the operator is fully aware of that as well. And I did just confirm, thanks to Jill Stansfield her diligence as she's watching this meeting right now. Thank you, Jill. She did confirm that the parking is going to be maintained by the parking department as well.
All right.
Thank you.
All set, Alderman Clee?
Yes, thank you.
Alderman Govia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. About a half hour ago, I received an email from our colleague from Ward 5 with just 3 questions, if you don't mind me just rapid firing them off to you.
Sure.
I said I would ask them for him. So the first question was, they decided to build this parking garage under the flats primarily to placate the owners of the River Casino. Since then, they've opened up a second one and have sold the company and are looking to move to a new location. Will that change the intended target of customers that use this garage? And do we know of any potential replacements for tenants at that High Street location?
It's a great question. Respectfully to the center of the question, I think that the placation is a value judgment, and I'm not sure I would agree to that, but I think what I would characterize it as in all seriousness is that the garage was certainly done out of a sensitivity to the availability of public parking and its removal that was possible with the project. That said, I think we have to recognize that although the structure above is intended to be using the parking garage, we do expect that some of those users will in fact use the internal space there. So it's possible that residents will park there. It's also very possible that businesses in the adjacent area will choose to park inside during certain weather events, or simply for the matter of keeping their car clean, or the security that the garage offers with the cameras that it has inside. So I don't believe that the departure or potential departure of the business next door in any way decreases the attractiveness of this parking asset. And frankly, based on what I think you all are being educated on relative to the parking study. There are some areas in the downtown where we have significant parking demand, and it's only expected to increase. And so I think this is actually, even if all the businesses were vacant nearby, I think there's real demand on this.
Second question?
Second question would be, you stated he drove by the location this afternoon. The entrance/exit of the garage is on School Street. He stated there is a garage door which was closed, so he asked, how do vehicles enter and exit the lot?
That's an excellent question.
I think I know the answer.
Go ahead, yep.
They've got to keep that door shut until we approve that it's a garage.
That's my belief. The one thing that I was gonna get more technical than that. The one thing I don't know is I believe it's an auto detection device, and that's how it works, as any garage is. But I may get a text confirming that in just a second. But my understanding is this sort of an auto detection format that will open upon, your vehicle arriving in front of the door. But that is absolutely correct that as of right now, that asset is not public. Well, it's public in a sense, but because we're not metering the spaces and it's not fully open, the door is not opening either. Hopefully that addresses that concern.
And the final question would be, the garage is described as climate controlled. Could you go into what that means? Is that heated, cooled, humidity controlled?
Yes. So my understanding is that it's heated, cooled, and I believe there's a full HVAC system within it that controls humidity as well. It's premium parking. If you've been into a climate controlled system in Boston, for example, there typically is a humidity system that deals with any moisture that accumulates, whether through vehicles bringing moisture into the garage or just the general humidity of either a subsurface or a surface garage. So I expect all those things, and I believe all those things are in place based on my understanding of the building. And it is in fact a sensor-based system at the garage door opening.
All set?
Yep.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make comment to your assertion of the potential for residents parking there. While I think there's potential, this is a 24/7 paid parking, no weekends or evenings. And was I not correct in my thinking that 75 spaces were put aside High Street for them to lease?
That's correct. So there's an arrangement, yes, it's a 24-hour arrangement, so that builds up the cost very quickly for someone that wants to leave their car there for 24 hours, where some of our other garages, the metering shuts off, obviously, at a certain time. And so it's more advantageous from a cost-saving perspective to park in one of the existing garages for that reason. But you're absolutely correct. This development specifically, or the development above, specifically relied upon the ability to lease spaces within the garage directly adjacent. They're counting on their residents parking there, and I'll just say very anecdotally that I lived in a similar scenario where there was sort of on-site parking that was very expensive, but then there was a free parking asset in a parking structure nearby. I always opted to park in the parking structure for long periods of time, and I can't guarantee that everyone will do that, but I know there's been a concern that residents will park downstairs. I'm sure some will in some cases, but that's not expected to be the case for the general resident of the building above.
All set?
Yes, thank you.
I have two things. You don't have to answer the questions tonight, but they should be answered at some point. Are they gonna have high-definition TV monitoring the garage? And the other is, are commercial vehicles going to be excluded? You don't have to answer them now. We can get those.
I cannot speak to the specific technology of the monitors, and I'm not laughing because that's a fair question, but I don't know specifically whether the monitors themselves are high definition. I do know that a full camera system is being installed within the garage, but I can't speak to the equipment that's being used to view it, nor to the recording necessarily. I'm sorry, I just don't understand the operations fully to that extent. I would also just note that I should have corrected this. The reserved parking within the garage at the High Street garage is in fact 150 spaces. Okay. It's sort of a one space per unit restriction. And we don't expect those will be fully occupied at all times, but there was certainly a contemplation and a deliberate action to make sure that enough parking was available there, and that's shared with the public as well. So just to be clear about that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is to
final passage.
We got the final passage of authorizing the new parking garage. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next item is general discussion. Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to talk about one thing on the Marlene petition. The lawyer for the, I believe it was the lawyer that was here for the people to discontinue it, had mentioned that the fire suppression, they talked to the fire department, and they said it was good by them, the 700 to 1,000 feet. Can we get something for you I guess for the next infrastructure meeting from the fire department that actually tells us that, and we're not just hearing it from one side or another? Because I'd like to have something like that in writing so we know it's okay that the fire department.
Director Sullivan will talk to Chief Buxton and get.
Okay.
I have something in writing, in fact.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I do. I wasn't going to address that because it didn't seem like deliberation was happening, but there is in fact engagement from not one, but two members of the fire service at different times. So
I just wanted to make sure that, sometimes people say stuff, I want to see it in writing because that's.
Absolutely, and there was actually a concern that Mar Lane was required to be a fire access at one point in time, and even in the event that was required at one point in time, the fire department weighed in, and they do not feel it's necessary for adequate fire suppression right now. But I'll work on providing those comments in advance of your next meeting before the petition comes
Just
back up.
Awesome. I
one other
appreciate that.
thing, they were making statements that if we didn't discontinue the street, they didn't necessarily have to give us easements. That's not true. We can require easements, we can take them.
I really, may I comment on that?
Sure.
Again, I didn't want to bring this up in the session, but
We don't have a motion on
you potentially don't have the ability to require easements. And the reason for that is, while the petitioner is saying that you have authority to execute a discontinuance, you in fact may not have that authority. And that's essentially what council has said as of this point in time. And so despite the fact that the four abutting property owners are willing to grant easements, that's wonderful, but you may not have the authority to even require those. They can, on their own accord, grant the city an easement and we can accept it at a later time. But there's a question, and we will provide clarification in advance of the next meeting, but there is a question as to whether or not you even have the authority to take up the discontinuance. I do not disagree with Attorney Piedra, and frankly, I'll acknowledge for the record that initially we had discussed sort of a belt and suspenders approach here, where even if the public rights have been discharged, there may be a need for a discontinuance based on a lack of clarity. Council has weighed in their opinion as of today, and I want to give them an opportunity to revisit that, is that belt and suspenders approach may not be appropriate. So anyway, I will return with more information, but my concern is that you may not have the authority, Alderman Dowd, and I'll get you more info, because a very reasonable thing that you're saying might not have the authority.
Before our next meeting, can you get Attorney Leonard's
Absolutely.
in writing?
Absolutely.
Or could somebody from legal come here?
I think that may be prudent. I'll discuss that with them.
Anyone else on general discussion? Seeing none, no one's here for public comment. Remarks by Alderman Cleen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to state that I've been working very hard with the alderman of Mar Lane in that area, Alderman Sullivan. He was very dedicated, going and speaking to neighbors and so on. It's always a rough decision for any alderman to have to make when it's in your yard. You're going to make some people happy and some unhappy. The fact that it's kind of been brought to our attention that there's a good chance that this is a moot point and that we really don't have a voice in it. One of the things I did want to add was that from that conversation that was out there, it sounds like they're going to want to give us an easement, especially if they're looking to be able to tie in some of that. They don't have enough space for leaching fields and so on, so it would be to their best interest to give us an easement if they want to be able to do that. They also need to, when it finally does come to, and I don't want to debate this because it's not on the floor, but they're going to need to understand that easement means that they can't gate it off. They can't put up a fence and a gate, which was kind of indicated at another conversation. that happened. So clear definition, whatever decision happens here from legal and so on, I think a clear definition of everything, and I would really like that for the next meeting. And for the public, it wasn't until, I think it was Thursday or Friday that Alderman Sullivan and myself actually approached legal. So this was a last minute kind of, let's get some clarification on everything. So I apologize that this was kind of thrown at the public at the last minute, but after much discussion that we had, our heads were spinning, and that's why we went to legal. So thank you.
Motion, Alderman Cleen.
Yes, at this time, I'd like to motion for adjournment.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We're adjourned at 8:35.
That's an excellent question. I could say, did Batman on Nashua?